Welcome to part 2 of the Git crash course. Last tutorial we talked about the very basics of the Git source control tool, and in this video we're going to jump into something a little bit more intermediate or maybe even advanced, and I'm going to show you a workflow that you can use to develop production ready software. This video is going to be great for anyone who may have already been familiar with Git and just wants to brush up on their skills, or anyone that's working on a team as a developer and has to collaborate with others on a repository. To follow along with this video, you're going to need some basic Git skills, so you're going to have to know how to add, commit, push, pull, all that kind of basic stuff, or just go back and watch the first video in this series. On the screen are the topics listed, although these are going to be a byproduct of the workflow that I'm going to show you, which is on the screen right here. I'm not going to try to spend the time explaining what this diagram means. If you want, you can pause the video and take a quick look at it. But essentially what's happening here is we are creating feature branches from the develop branch, which is considered like the main development branch that we're working on, and we are going to do work on that feature, commit it, and eventually merge it back into the develop branch, which will then eventually be merged into the master branch, tagged as a release, and then you will start the workflow over and over again. Now, it doesn't make sense yet because we don't really know what a branch is or how to check out a branch, how to create one. But I think the easiest way to do so is to just get started and go through a practical example and actually build out a repository. I will start off by creating a repository. We'll name it Basic Git Workflow, and I will click Create. Once we have this, copy the URL or the SSH URL, and then come back to the terminal where we will actually get this set up. I'll make a directory called Git Workflow, cd into it, and type git init to initialize our repo. We will then say git remote add origin and copy in the URL that we just saw on GitHub. So this will connect our repository up, and then finally we're going to create a few files. And once we've done that, we have enough to make our first commit. So we will go in there and add the files. You can do this by typing in both of the files, or you can just type dot to add them all. You can check them with git status. You see that we have 2 in the staging area, which we will now commit as our first commit to the repository. And finally, we are going to push that up to the master branch of our repository on GitHub. And when we do that and come back to GitHub, refresh the screen, you'll see that we have one commit with these 2 files. Alright, so pretty simple. The last thing that we need to do is set up a license for this repository. So we will touch license, and then what we're going to do is open that up with Vim and copy in the following contents. If you were to use this repository, you would just add your name under the copyright here. That's how an MIT license works. So you would come up here and actually type the same thing, so copyright 2019 or whenever you're viewing this, and then your name. So that's how you would use an MIT license correctly. So we'll save that, get out of there, and then add this license. We're just doing this so that we have a couple commits to work with at the beginning. We will commit this, add license, if I can type, and then we'll push that up to the master branch as well. I know we haven't actually done all that much work yet, but for our sake of learning, we are going to consider the work that we've done the first production release for this repository. So it's definitely not a production release, it's not even useful software, but we'll go with that just to demonstrate this workflow that we're trying to get at. So we have already committed 2 commits, and say that we wanted to tag that second commit as the first production release. To do that, we're going to have to first see what tags are in our repository already. So you just type git tag, and you'll see that there's nothing there, which is something that we would expect given that we haven't tagged anything yet. To actually tag this first production release, what we'll type is git tag, A for annotated tag, which allows us to type in version 1.0 as the marker for it. And then we'll type in a message, added the first tag. And what this will do, since we didn't specify any particular commit to tag, it's going to tag the most recent commit, which is the one that we would want. Now we can also show this tag, so by typing git show, and it'll show all the things that are in this particular tag. And you can see that we have the license, and that's what was on the latest commit. Alright, so we have the first tag, and now we can type git tag and see version 1.0. Now to push this up to our repository, since we didn't actually add new files, we can type the git push and then type in the tags flag and then type origin master. And that will push it up to the master branch at our remote repository, which if we flip over there and refresh, you'll see that we added the license, and then you will also see in the tag section we have this version 1.0. So that indicates that this was a successful push of that particular tag. Alright, we've created our first tag, and now we're going to create our first branch. Now as we'd spoken about earlier with the diagram, we want to have a master branch that will be kind of our production releases only. So we're only going to push code that we consider production up to the master branch. And we'll do all of our developing on some other branches, namely the develop branch and then a multitude of feature branches. We'll get into the feature branches a little bit later. To create this develop branch, all we need to do is type git branch develop. And if we pressed enter, it would create the develop branch. Before I do that, I want to show you a command that you can use with Git that will help you understand what is going on in your repository. So that command is git log, and you can type it git log, which will print out everything, including my email address, which I'm not so interested in doing. Or you could type out a longer version of that command, which says git log, one line, decorate, graph all. This will print out one line for each commit. It will decorate it, highlight it with different colors, and it'll put it in a graph. So as we start to branch out and merge changes into branches, you'll see how this works. And then this last part says all, just meaning that we're going to print out all the branches, not just the current branch that we're on. So you can press enter, and you will see the history of this repository. Now, one tip, I would put this into an alias. So if you go into your profile, this is where you would put your alias, and I can type glog and get the same result. So it's a much quicker way than trying to type out and remember all of these options. So that's just a quick tip. Alright, so we type glog, and this is going to show us the history of our repo. In this output, I wanted to point out 3 things. So on the right, you'll have the commit message. On the left, you'll have the commit hash, which has obviously been abbreviated. So you'll just see the first 7 characters, and that will represent the whole commit. And then third is this little parentheses right here, which basically shows you that the head pointer is pointing at the master branch, It has a tag of version 1.0, and it represents the origin master on the remote repository. Now, we're going to learn about this in just a moment, but first, let's go ahead and create that new branch. So if we type git branch develop and press enter, you can see that nothing has really been output, but if we type git branch, you'll see that we now have two branches in our repository. Notice that the star is still on the master branch, and that is because we haven't switched over to our new develop branch yet. And we can see this represented in the presentation. So you'll have the first commit, the second commit, which has the version 1.0 tag, and then the more interesting thing about this is all the stuff going on around these commits. So in Git, it's very important to understand this pointer right here called head. And the reason being is because the head pointer tells us where the Git repository is currently pointing. And as you can see here, we are pointing the head pointer at the master branch pointer, which subsequently is pointing at the most recent commit in our repository. As we had seen a little bit earlier, we had created this new develop branch, but we haven't actually checked it out yet, which basically means that the head pointer is still going to point at the master branch, which points at the most recent commit. The develop branch also points at that recent commit, but we won't be able to work on it until we actually check it out. So let's go back to the terminal, and the first thing that we'll do before checking out this branch, and when I say checking out, I just mean switching over to it. The first thing we'll do is type git status. And the reason that we have to do this is because if there's anything in our working directory that doesn't match the repository or the staging area, it's going to prevent us from actually switching branches, because Git is designed to lose the least amount of work possible, and it kind of protects against losing any work through this mechanism. So we have a working tree that is clean, so we can check out the develop branch. And when we do that, it says we have switched to develop, and if we go back to our presentation and switch to the next slide, you'll see that this head pointer has actually flipped from the top, pointing at the master branch pointer, and now it's pointing at develop. And that just means that we're pointing the head at develop, which is pointed at the latest commit, and therefore we have checked out the develop branch and we can work on it. If we come back to the terminal and type git branch, you will also see this reflected. We have the star pointed to the develop branch. If we wanted to actually make some changes to this develop branch, now that we're actually switched to it or checked out to the develop branch, we can start editing our working directory. So I will create, actually we're not going to create, we're going to edit the index.html file. So at the moment it looks pretty awful, and it's just basically a long string of HTML. Obviously, if we were actually coding this, we would make this a little bit more formatted. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to basically just delete all this, and then we'll copy in an amended version. This form of HTML is a lot cleaner, and you can also see we've got this CSS in here and a few more tags at the bottom. So we'll save and quit. And then what we can do is add this to the develop branch. And it is as easy as just adding index.html. We don't have to do anything special. Then we can commit something. So add CSS to HTML. And then finally we can say git push origin, and then instead of master, so this would be pushing to the master branch, we'll reverse that and we'll say develop branch. So we're going to be pushing that commit to the develop branch. Let's run our glog command, which is just the git log with all those options that I showed earlier. And you'll see that we now have the head pointing at develop, and we have this latest commit here, which is 37CE749. Let's go back to the presentation and see what our repository looks like now. You can see that we have 3 commits, and the develop branch is pointing at the most recent commit, and the head pointer down here is pointing at the develop branch. So therefore, the head, or where we're working in the repository, is at the latest commit, but the master branch up here is actually a commit behind. So if we wanted to catch that up, what we would do is called a fast forward. You'll see this a little later on when we finally kind of merge the develop branch into the master branch. Let's make a few more changes to this repository, and we are going to eventually make our second release for this, whatever software project that we're making. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go into the index.html file, and we're just going to get rid of the style stuff. We're going to add the CSS to a separate file, so we will refer to that in the HTML as style.css. And then I think we can keep the rest of this the same. So let's save and quit. And then what we'll do is create a style.css file. And remember, we are still on the develop branch, so all of these files, even the file that we just created, is not going to be present on the master branch quite yet. So we'll put in the style.css content, and this is going to connect up with our HTML document, and we can finally stage and commit our changes. So we'll just type git add dot for all, and when we type git status, you should see in the staging area we have these two files that one of them is a new file and one is modified. We will commit this to our develop branch, so split HTML and CSS. And then finally, we will push to the develop branch. We can print out the history or the log of the Git repository and see we have this new commit hash here. And we can look at this over in the presentation to see that we now have a fourth commit. And once again, the develop branch will be pointing at that commit, and the head pointer will be pointing at the develop branch. So therefore, we are currently at this latest commit. The next thing that we're going to do is not add anything more to our develop branch, but actually create a new branch called feature 1. So this is going to be our first feature branch and is kind of part of the workflow where, say, you've got a couple people working on the develop branch at once, and therefore you're going to, if you want to make any changes without messing with other people's code, you're going to have to create a new branch based on the develop branch and call it some sort of feature. And then you work on that and eventually merge it back into the develop branch. To create the feature, we'll first look and see what branches we have, make sure that we just have these two, and then we will type git branch and then feature 1. So I just say feat 1 for brevity. We created the feature branch, and now we want to check our status. We have nothing to commit. The working tree is clean, so therefore we can check out the feature 1 branch. Now that we have this feature branch checked out, let's go ahead and add some JavaScript to our HTML file. The way that we'll do that is by first adding the tag to the end of the body. So go down here. We don't want to do that. Let's see. And then we will add a script in here with a source of .script.js. And that is all we need to do to add it to the HTML. We also need to create script.js and put the following contents in that script. For anyone actually interested in what the code is doing, you don't really need to be. Basically what this is going to do is kind of flash the header that's in our HTML file. So if you're following along and actually running this HTML, that's what this is going to do. Nevertheless, let's save that and quit. And then finally, we will update our CSS file one more time to have a few more changes. So we need to add this little hidden class at the bottom to allow our JavaScript to work correctly. And once we've done that, we should be good. So we will now add everything to our feature branch staging area. If we type git status, you'll see that we have these 3 files, 2 that were modified, 1 that was created new. And then finally, what we can do is add this or commit this to our feature branch. We have committed this, and we will now push to the feature 1 branch instead of develop. We created a feature branch and we added some what we think is super complex JavaScript. You know, we're just patting ourselves on the back. And then we realize, wait a second, we forgot to add a gitignore to our file or to our repository. So we'll go back to our develop branch. So we git checkout develop, and then we will create some sort of to-do list.txt, and in this to-do list maybe we'll say write awesome code, and that's our only to-do for the day. The reason that I created that is basically just to demonstrate what the gitignore file is going to do for anyone watching this video that is not so aware. And when we create this gitignore file in the root of the repository, it's going to tell Git which files that we don't need to keep track of and basically ignore. So we create this gitignore. Remember, we're in the develop branch. We switched from the feature branch. And in this gitignore, we're going to echo in to-do list.txt. So that's basically going to ignore the to-do list file from our repository, and then we are going to add everything. And then when we type git status, you'll see that we have a new file .gitignore, but it doesn't show the to-do list.txt, and that's because we put that file in the .gitignore and asked Git to kind of just forget about it. So we have added this file here, and what we want to do is actually commit it. And then finally, we will push to the develop branch. So since the last time we kind of looked back at our repository and put it in a diagram, we've made several changes. So we changed the index.html file, and we added a JavaScript file, and we even added some new CSS. That was all done on the feature 1 branch. We then forgot about the gitignore file. We said, hey, you know, we want to actually add that to the develop branch. It's a day later. We're not thinking about the feature branch anymore. So we come over to develop and we add the gitignore file. We commit that file, and so now we have 1 commit on our feature 1 branch and 1 commit on our develop branch. If we type that fancy command, I'll just repeat it. I won't do the glog for this one. I'll actually copy in the full command here so that you can see it. And now you'll see that this little decorate and graph coming into action, because you'll see right here there's kind of like a split going on in our repository. Instead of looking at this little tree that we have, although this is basically what you're going to be doing once you're on your own, we'll go over to a diagram that I've put together that kind of shows this repository in a more visual way. So you'll see our master branch is still at the first release. We haven't made any changes to it in the past couple commits. And so we have all these commits, and finally we have these 2 commits that are basically diverging. So this DEBFAE4 commit is actually going to be the parent commit for both of these commits that we just made. So the first one is the JavaScript feature. So this is going to be the update to the index.html, the update to the style.css, and the creation of the JavaScript or whatever it's called, script.js. So we've changed 3 files in this commit, and then that's on feature 1 branch. So you can see that feature 1 branch pointer is pointing at that commit. And then you see down here the develop branch is pointing at the commit where we added the .gitignore file. You can also see that the head pointer is pointing at develop, which just means that we're currently sitting on the develop branch. Let's hop back into the terminal and just kind of see what's going on here. So remember, we have the 266 commit is going to be the JavaScript feature, and the 740 is going to be the .gitignore file. So we pop back into the terminal, and what we're going to find out is that currently we are sitting on the develop branch, and therefore the files in this branch are not going to match this JavaScript feature that we added. So notice we don't have anything that resembles a JavaScript file, and if we cat out the index.html, we don't see anything down in the body that links up to a JavaScript file. So clearly we don't have those changes there, but what we do have if we print out hidden files is this gitignore file, and that makes sense because we added that to the develop branch. Now let's type git status. You can see that we're on branch develop, nothing to commit, working tree clean, so we can check out the feature 1 branch. Once we check this feature 1 branch out, you'll start to see we actually have the script.js here. So this is the JavaScript file that we made. And if we cat out the index.html, you'll see that we have the script tag added at the bottom of the body. So basically what I'm trying to say is we have these 2 different commits on 2 different branches, and so basically these branches have completely different snapshots of our repository. Now the goal is going to be we want this feature branch to merge back into the develop branch. Since the changes that we made on the feature 1 branch and the develop branch are not going to conflict, so we didn't edit like the same parts of a single file, we can merge them pretty cleanly together. And the way that we merge something together is by first checking out the branch that we want to merge into, and then typing the git merge command followed by the name of the branch that we want to bring into the branch that we're currently checked out on. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful, but you'll see what I mean in a second. So let's first check out the develop branch. And from here, what we can do is type git merge and then feature 1. And what this is going to do is take all of those changes from feature 1 branch and pull them in to our develop branch. In other words, once we have this merged, our develop branch is going to show the script.js, it'll have the updated style.css, the updated index.html, and the .gitignore that was originally edited on the develop branch. So we'll press enter, and it's going to pop us into a message, and we can edit this message however we want. I don't really care to change it, so I'm going to save and quit from Vim. And you'll see that we said the merge was made by the recursive strategy, and we have these 3 files from the feature branch. And you will notice that there's no .gitignore here because that was already on the branch that we're merging into. So let's clear the screen and type ls to see that we now have script.js, and to confirm we are on the develop branch right here. So the last step after we've merged files from the feature 1 branch into develop is to delete the feature 1 branch, because we don't actually need it any longer. The way that we do that is by typing git branch and then give it the -d flag and type feature 1. And what this will do is actually completely delete the feature branch. It says deleted branch, and it was on this commit. To see what's going on in our repo, we'll once again type the git log command, and when we see the output here, we're going to notice that this branch has actually kind of merged back in to the develop branch. So these are the 2 commits right here that we had merged together into the develop branch, and you can see that this is the JavaScript stuff and this is the .gitignore, which eventually merges together into the develop branch at commit CE60A9B. Let's hop into the PowerPoint again and just visualize this a little bit easier. So once again, master branch is still way back there. Eventually we're going to merge develop into master and they'll be the same, but for now that's kind of sitting way back in time and it's only got a couple files. You'll see here are our two commits where we have the JavaScript feature and the gitignore file, and then this commit right here, which is the latest commit that we're currently on, hence the head pointer that's pointing at the develop pointer, which is pointing at this commit. That brings these two changes or commits into one commit on the develop branch. Now the last thing that we want to do is take all the information here, what we call a snapshot or a commit, and we want to take all this information and merge it into the master branch. Now it's going to be a little bit different than this merge here, because in this merge we actually had two commits that were coming from the same parent commit. Now in this case the master branch is sitting way back in time and it actually has no divergence. So basically what we're going to be doing is taking the pointer for the master branch that's currently pointing at this commit right here, and we're just going to march it all the way up the repository and point it at this last commit right here. So we're not actually doing like truly a merge, it's basically moving the pointer to the latest commit. Let's go into the terminal and do that really quickly. The first thing that we need to do is once again type git status, make sure that we have a clean working tree, and then after that has been checked we will move over to the master branch. So we are now on our master branch, which is where we will do all of our production releases, and the way that we merge, as I just explained, the develop into master is by typing git merge develop. And that's going to bring develop into the master branch that we're currently on. You'll see that we fast forwarded, and the reason that it says fast forward is we're basically taking that pointer, the master branch pointer, and walking it up the commit line to the latest commit. So now if we type the glog, you can see that the head is pointing at master and develop because they're actually at the same exact spot. The last thing that we need to do, since we officially released our production code, is tag the commit that is the most recent one on the master branch. So remember, we are still on the master branch and we can write this tag, so version 1.1, and we have officially tagged the latest commit on the master branch. We can now jump back into the presentation and see the final state of our repository. So as you can see, the only thing that changed is we took this master branch and we originally had it pointed at this commit right here, version 1.0, but we basically moved that pointer up the repo and pointed it at the latest commit in the repo. And then finally we pointed the head pointer at the master branch, so basically we're currently working on the master branch. And the reason that we saw this in parentheses here, head is pointing at master and then comma develop, is because the develop branch is going to be pointing at that latest commit as well. So develop branch pointing at that commit as well as the master branch. And that is pretty much it. That is the basic Git workflow. So to recap, basically all we did was we created a master branch and a develop branch. We did some work on that develop branch. We maybe created a couple feature branches, merged those into the develop branch, and eventually when we were ready to release our production code, we merged the develop branch into the master branch. So this is basically the workflow that even pretty complex projects from big companies will use. I will say that there are a couple extra branches that many companies are going to use to manage their source code. That could be things like hot fixes. There might actually be a branch dedicated solely to preparing a new release to go out into production. But in essence, we are looking at a professional Git workflow, and you can just go through this over and over again, releasing, version 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, and use this for pretty much any project that you would ever need.